wanted to take time today, and I personally just want to hear from you. I know we've talked a lot over the years, but just an opportunity to sit down and just interview you and just ask you, I started with some basic questions, but those don't have to be the only questions we ask, but I wanted it to be a frame of reference for you. But just want you to share your heart and tell us, what do you think about leadership, and where do you think, especially in the kingdom, where do you think leadership needs to go in the kingdom of God? And I'm going to have my head down quite a bit because I'm going to be taking notes. So if I have my head down, I'm not disinterested. So
no worries. And I'm thankful and honored. Pastor Jeremy, you are such a great leader. And I don't know if I have an hour worth of content, but I do. I am thankful for the opportunity to kind of share, because I do think experience. I mean, I look back at when I was a teenager or in my early 20s, and, some ability to lead. But I've also learned that experience is so valuable. And so I would also encourage, our youth, because I always learn from the youth, and I value what they bring to the table, the energy and their opinions and their values and everything else. At the same time, I've been through some things, and those that are a little bit older and maybe in leadership have been through some things that the youth can maybe not make the same mistakes we made, and so I think it works both ways. And I always feel like especially in the kingdom of God, let's seek out win-win solutions as much as we can. And when we can, look to the youth for that new ideas. And I'm amazed, with Aaliyah and Lexi right now, when I give them a device, a computer, something like that, or the phone, iPad, how quickly they navigate it. And I feel like I'm so slow, and it's just, so the next gen brings, a certain value. And then the things that we've been through in leadership, I think, bring some value. So I think we can, regardless of age, kind of win from learning from each other, just being open to learn from each other. But you asked me about, what is leadership? And, the usual answer you hear is leadership is influence. And, that's always kind of challenged me. I look at leadership like leadership is situational. Leadership depends. Even when I was working with companies on what leadership meant for them, it depended on the company, the direction they wanted to go, the types of skills and behaviors and values, all the different aspects. So leadership is so much more dynamic and challenging. And that's what makes it exciting to me as well, is that I take it all situationally. Ruby can tell you, when I go into a leadership dynamic or a conversation or a situation, I want to hear all sides. I want to look at every dynamic, every aspect of it. I don't want to assume I know everything and go in with, everything already mapped out. There's so many things that can play into decisions we make and everything else. So I would say it depends. Tell me more about the situation. When I was working with a Japanese automaker one time, and well, actually I worked with them for years, but they had this term that I just love. It's part of Six Sigma, and it's called Gemba. And it means go to where the work is done. And so I would always, when I was dealing with different situations, things like that, I want to go find out from the people that are on the front line. I want to hear from those that are maybe volunteering or dealing with things, in person, that may have more information than I do. And, we can't discount just because somebody doesn't have the title or something like that. if someone's heavily engaged or involved with the situation, we need that information from them. And so I just find that is really important, and it's good to get as much information as you can before, making decisions and things like that. I've also found, just like with our small groups, I'm really careful when I show up because I know people act differently when I'm there, more because of my position. All of a sudden see people start to act different or that kind of thing. So a lot of times I won't just jump in, and I also have some women's groups too, like Unique Women, and so they don't want me to attend, and it would be funny if I kind of attended and that kind of thing. So I really rely on those that are the facilitators, even people in the groups, but I don't know what I don't know. So I always encourage people, share feedback with me. Let me know what's going on. I want to hear, I want to know, but if they don't, then there's no way for me to know. So sometimes I don't have all the information or know that a group's not working well if nobody comes and tells me those kind of things. But I could ramble on about what leadership is, but let me stop there and see what direction you want to go with that. Oh, let me add one thing I was thinking about as I thought through this question. If we say leadership is influence, then Hitler was a great leader. And I think everybody would agree Hitler wasn't a great leader. But he was highly influential. And so I'd say how you use your influence is more important than influence itself. And so I always tell my leaders or my volunteers, I'll do what I can in my influence to help you accomplish what you need to achieve. A lot of times I feel like I'm a barrier breaker. The things I do anytime I'm asked to take on a new ministry is I'll go in and ask the volunteers, I'll ask the leaders, what's getting in your way? And, there's kind of a great rule in leadership. I call it small wins. And Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York back in the 90s, crime rate was an all-time high. Murder rate was at an all-time high. And how do you reduce the murder rate? Well, what he did was he put teams around the city, and he armed them with paintbrushes, rollers, and paint. And there was graffiti all over the city. And there was broken windows and glass and trash and all this kind of thing. And he had these teams paint over any graffiti. And then anytime it would pop, fixed broken windows, and they picked up the trash. And all of a sudden, crime rates started going down because people had a visible sign that things could change. And so I always look within the ministry of what's a small win to show that change is possible. What is something getting in their way that we could maybe with a different set of eyes, or maybe with coming at it a different way, we could do it differently or kind of remove that barrier. And then all of a sudden, the leaders and volunteers see that we can make a change. And they'll start to buy into the vision or new direction that you may have in your ministry, something like that. So.
That's good. That's good. And I like what you said. I like what you said about the Japanese car company, Gemba.
Yeah, Gemba means go to where the work is done.
Do you know how to spell that?
Gemba.
Okay.
And it's just a great term, that they use to, and it's why the back in the day, I forget which decade it was, but the Japanese automakers were kicking it. They were just, everybody was looking to them for how are they maximizing this supply chain and everything else. Well, that was one of these, they call it Six Sigma. It's kind of a process that they use. And Gemba was part of that. Go to where the work is done. Ask that frontline manager, that frontline worker, how we can improve the process. Because a lot of times we make those decisions, high up, and we don't have a view of what's actually taking place or getting in the way at the front line.
That's good. That's good. I like the story of Rudy Giuliani. He did a phenomenal job in New York with some of the crime rate stuff. I mean, he really did. And it was outside the box thinking than New York. It was like, put more cops on the street. Well, that's not always the answer. Anyways. Yeah, he did a great job. What do you think, what matters most to you from your experience? I mean, I could look, you and I could probably read 10 leadership books, and 10 books are going to say probably the same 9 things, right? Leadership is about people, leadership, like we get all of that, the theoretical things that are the core of what leadership is. It's human beings, it's, emotional quotient, it's being able to make decisions and all of that. In your mind, from your experience, what has been something, maybe not the ultimate thing, but what has been one thing to you that matters? It's so vital. Maybe it's not the center, but it's central to leadership. What's one thing that you would say, man, is irreplaceable?
Yeah, I love that question, Pastor Jeremy. There's a difference between worldly leadership to where it's about profits and it's about, maybe the focus isn't always on the people. In Christian leadership, it's about the people. And so I always look at, how can I build somebody up? How can I help somebody become all that God created them to be? And do myself, but shame on me if I do that, because I'm missing opportunities to build and grow other people up. Ruby does things outside of her job description because we've had conversation about where her passion is and what she'd like to do. And so she actually does some of my job. But it is a passion for her. It keeps her engaged. It's grown her as a leader. And she does such a great job with internship and things like that. And I think she has appreciated that I do something like that. So I would say in that, if you picked a term or something like that, it would be empowerment. It would be delegation. And so I don't see delegation as abdication. We as leaders should know what's going on in our ministries, in our workplace, things like that. A good example of that with Bruce Gibbons, one of my ministry leaders. Bruce is a great guy, a great Christian leader, and he's done a great job with Maximize Manhood. And we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And thousands of guys have been discipled at Lakewood through this very successful program that's a global program. And millions of men around the world have been impacted, influenced by this. Well, Bruce was really good at growing the ministry. But I told him, if you want to take it to the next level, if you want to grow this beyond where it is right now, you're going to have to not do it all yourself. You're going to have to raise up other leaders, ministry leaders. You're going to have to delegate. And a lot of times it's hard to delegate because we don't want to give up control, or we're afraid that if they don't do it right, it's going to reflect on us. Or sometimes we're afraid for our jobs, especially if you're in business and you feel like I could do it better, or, what if they do it wrong, or all these kind of things. So to me, empowerment and delegation is one of the biggest leadership hurdles for someone to go to the next level as a leader. And I watched Bruce as he listened to me and we walked it out together. I saw him go to another level. Now he has ministry leaders in place. He was able to do some other things and launch some other things for doing maximize manhood outside and do outreaches and grow it in different ways. He even took on Unique Woman when we brought that into the church, and the women wanted to be discipled as well. And he raised up women to take that on. Do anymore. So a lot of times, people will say, John, how can you manage so many ministries? Well, I can't, but I raise up really good leaders who I check in with, who I help them navigate what they're trying to succeed. And I kind of try to keep things on focus and going in the right direction. But if you really want to be a great leader, if you want to go to another level, if you want to empower people and help them have opportunities to grow, man, delegation and empowerment and bringing out the most and the best in others is key to that.
That's good. Yeah, a lot of times it seems like people think the idea of delegation is like passing the buck. Well, these are just the things that I don't want to do. As a leader, it's like you get in that trap of, well, these are just minor little things I don't really want to do. They need to be done, but I don't want to do them. So I'm just going to give them to somebody else. And I'm like, those can be sometimes the little atomic tasks and objectives that can torpedo the whole thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I like to use the term intentional delegation. And so I'm intentional with what I'm delegating to somebody. I look for ways, like some good examples are like Karsten Smith, who was one of our interns. And I was asked to transition Celebrate Recovery. And part of the struggle was the worship wasn't the excellence that Lakewood expects or, is used to. And so Pastor Craig that we could do away with worship for Celebrate Recovery if we wanted to. And so as we transitioned to what's now called Freedom, I charged Karsten Smith, who great worship leader and, on stage at Lakewood and all this kind of stuff. And he was a great intern. In fact, we invited him back for a second year. So for his second year, I gave him Celebrate Recovery's worship and we turned it into Freedom Worship. And I asked him to build the team. I asked him to transfer and transition and align this with Lakewood. And it was a huge project for him. He had to navigate the current volunteers, bringing in new volunteers, all this kind of thing. Everything he went through that change management, when he went to be with the Woodlands and be the worship, he said everything he's doing now, he learned at Lakewood as part of that. And so what we did was set him up for success to where he could then interview and say the right things and have the experience around, hey, I actually did this. And we gave him the opportunity to do that. And I have tons of examples of that. And it's just so meaningful to me when I can look at taking Patty Zavala, or a Gigi or whoever it might be, and see them go to the next level and see them even come on staff and be part of ministry and all those kind of things. And that's what's exciting to me. That's a win for me. I get more excited about others succeeding than I do myself even. And I think that's a big difference between how I was in the world and how I am as a Christian leader. I was, like I said, always good at leading, but I was a selfish leader. I was doing it for my own ambitions. I was looking for the limelight. In fact, it's funny, when I got saved, I went from, where I'd speak to large groups and I loved doing that. And I was very passionate about it, to where God totally took that from me. I don't like to speak to big groups anymore. I mean, I'll do it if I'm called to do it, but I like doing what I'm doing a lot more, walking out life with people, doing more one-on-one, I feel like I'm more of a discipleship pastor. Well, that transition came through me being saved, laying down my own ambitions and saying, God, what do you want me to do? And that's so a Christian leader is much more of a selfless leader, much more of a, how can I help others? How can I serve others? It's much more of a servant leadership than what, and great example of this pastor's kid. You kind of grew up with the church. I wasn't saved until I was 35 years old. And so I know a lot about being in the world, being a leader in the world, working in the world. And I've never been more satisfied than I have been as a Christian leader, as serving in the church, as even giving up finances to be able to do what I'm doing today. But I've never been more satisfied than when I'm helping others grow versus just caring about myself.
I remember that conversation that we had, and you talked to me about that. You didn't give me any sort of numbers and don't need to know them, but knowing that you came from business corporate world, had been working with groups for a long time, and then you gave up what the world would look at as the valuable things, and you found something more valuable, which is I think vision. You know, honestly, if I'm being honest, like, that's vision. It's the vision to say, you know what, it's not about me, it's not about the money I make, it's about the fulfillment of my soul, that I care about human beings. And
it's good. I told my kids, you know, find what you love to do that comes natural to you, that you're good at doing, and that you can make money doing. And then you'll never work a day in your life, you know? And so my son loves sports. I mean, and he's good at stats and all that. So he wanted to be a sports agent. So he actually went to the University of Texas and graduated with a sports management degree. He's in law school now. And because he wanted to be able to write sports contracts, and he found a way to do what he loves doing, you know, and make money doing it. And I feel like so many times we do what our parents wanted us to do, or, you know, we always did this, or, but people do, and sometimes take on things or go in a direction based on what other people think and these kind of things. But if you can zone into what you're great at doing, what you're how God wired you to do it, and do it, I feel like God's wired me to walk out crisis with people, you know, to deal with walking out, you know, I guess the transformation it takes from going from being saved. You know, I love what Pastor says, Pastor Joel, he says, you know, salvation happens in an instant, but becoming takes time. And so that's why I don't shortchange our classes. All of our classes are a year. Freedom Ministry on Friday nights is a year. And we're getting testimony after testimony because we don't shortchange the process, you know, so.
Nobody is exempt from the process. Nobody. No matter how much we try to shortcut growth, healing, anything, nobody shortcuts the process. And it's because, to me, it's the Abrahamic principle. It's like Abraham blew it trying to create Isaac. We got Ishmael, but God took him back around the mountain, didn't fully strip the promise from him, but he took him back around the mountain and said, okay, you're going to trust me again, when he had Isaac. And because even our father of faith doesn't usurp or circumvent the process.
Well, and sometimes the process itself, you know, it doesn't always happen the way we think it should or would or could. But my divorce is a great example. And I've kind of changed. I used to say my unwanted divorce, you know, now I say it was my unexpected divorce, because nobody wants a divorce.
Right.
It was more of an unexpected divorce. And I never imagined I'd go through that, but going through that was probably my created more who I am today than any other thing. And so would I go through that again to become who I am today? Absolutely. When you're in the middle of it, though, you're not thinking that. You're going, this is the worst time of my life. God, what's going on here? We were both saved. How did this happen? There's all kinds of lessons around that. But I was humbled. I was on my knees seeking God. I understood the struggle of being a single parent and what single moms go through. And that's part of my passion towards helping people in crisis. Is I've been there. I know it. I had to rely on God because financially I didn't know how I was going to keep my house, and God showed up. And so I started tithing where I wasn't passionate about that before. I would tithe, but not out of my heart. But all of that came out of the process, came out of a situation I went through. And it may not be, and hopefully for people listening, it's not, you don't go through that. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But who knows what you might go through. But know that God works everything to good, for good. And, I stopped asking God, why am I going through this? And started, God, what do you want me to learn through this? And so perspective is everything. Perspective is how we're going to get through something. If we have a perspective as a victim, and why are we going through this, and why, God, are you doing this to me, and why did you take my loved one, and all this kind of stuff, you're in an endless loop. But when you can take the perspective of a victor and say, God, what do you want me to learn through this? How can I grow through this? How can I make the most of this moment? Then you kind of reposition, the whole perspective on that, and can grow through it and come out better than you were before.
My hand hurts. I'm trying to write fast enough to keep up with you. I have almost a full page now. So, but I feel like one of the things you just said sparked a thought in me. And as you were talking, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I grew up loving them, playing the video game, the characters and watching the show. And you're kind of like Master Splinter, like there's this guy that you can just go to, and he has like the I Ching rules for life or whatever. It's like, I see the ability in you to care for people through some of their hardest times. And that's, and to stay emotionally fit, I think, is the thing. It's almost like your pastor, leader, motivational speaker, counselor. There's like you're like Master Splinter just with presidential hair. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like there's this ability for you to kind of, and I think that's a real, it's a gift. I don't think you can just teach anybody to go to 5 different areas and be able to invest in people's lives in 5 different areas. You could sit like Rebecca James and counsel. You could sit and teach people how to be good public speakers. You could sit and walk through somebody through a painful, traumatic experience. Like, you could walk through somebody losing their house, not only physically, but emotionally. Like, you can walk through freedom. You can walk through a lot of things. And I think that's, it shows me that you haven't allowed the experiences you've had in life to be in vain. That's what it says, is that you've been willing to say, how do I move forward and become stronger and a better and healthier person through these things? And I think a lot, just my personal opinion, I think a lot of us as humans, we get stuck because we have something happen that we didn't expect. And then it becomes, if I can use the CR term, the hang up, the hiccup, or the freedom term. And sometimes we're kind of in this cul-de-sac of just going around and around and around. And it takes somebody who has the vision to lead us out of that.
Well, and I like to think of it like Moses bringing the children of Israel out, of Egypt.
It's good.
And they had to go around the mountain for 40 years. So I use that term a lot. I'm like, they could have gone into the promised land in 11 days. But their hearts weren't right. They were murmuring and saying, I'd rather be a slave back in Egypt. So God had to work that out of them, and they didn't get to go into the promised land. It was Joshua and the next generation. So we can get stuck and go around that mountain over and over again if we want to, but I'd rather enter in. So that's why I asked, so I can live in your fullness. Your promises are yes and amen. I want to live this out and be everything you created me to be. I don't want to waste time going around in circles all the time. And so many people, especially that have dealt with addictions, that have dealt with loss in their lives, grief, divorce, all these kind of things, they could get stuck and just continue. I see it with poverty as well. With me helping so many people in crisis, one of the things that I see is there's kind of a poverty mindset of, I don't maintain my stuff. I look at the houses and they're hoarding and, doing all these things. And I think that's part of being stuck, is we don't move forward. We don't have a lot, so we hold on to what we do have and those kind of things. And we have to grow through these things. So questions, so I don't get stuck, and I can move forward. It doesn't mean that you and I don't go through things as pastors. We do. We just, to me, it drives me to my knees. My devotional life is never better than when I'm going through a struggle,
That's so good. Something you said a minute ago, and I made a note. Yeah, sorry, I'm just chewing on what you just said. I'm taking it in. I feel like what you said a minute ago, you used the word humility. And I think sometimes humiliation can be in vain if we look at it as just humiliation and it becomes an insecurity. Like, I don't want people to see this. I feel like humility can come out of it even when it's tough. But that to me is a cornerstone of leadership, or investing in people, or raising up people, or teaching or training. Or can you speak to that? What have you learned about just the process of humility in a leader's life?
Yeah, that's great, because humility is key, and I love that it's a part of the DNA of Lakewood. So I've had the opportunity over 20 years to see Pastor Joel be a great example of humility. Here's a guy that is hugely successful, globally successful. Millions of people follow him and know who he is. He sells, tons of books, and, but he stays humble. He has every reason, if anybody does, to not be humble. And so I just love being under his covering, being under his example. And there have been times where I wanted to lash out at people that were going against him or things like that. But he also taught me I don't have to respond, and don't respond to your critics. And I've seen his critics fall away. So, it started with just having a really good example and wanting to follow that example. So Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. Well, Pastor Joel, I feel like, hears from the Spirit. He's following Christ. He's teaching us these principles and making it practical where we can live it out. And so that was probably part of when something hard like a divorce came into my life. I already had a firm foundation of how to go through that. I did when the divorce happened was I focused on my devotional time. I had never been comfortable being alone, and I had always gone from relationship to relationship, and all of a sudden I'm alone. I had a lot of alone time, and I got the best advice from Dr. Paul Osteen when I met with him. He said, John, I don't want you to date for 3 years. Well, for a guy, that's really tough. But I see after a divorce, so many guys jump into another relationship and be worse off than they were before. They didn't really learn anything from it. They just don't want to be alone. I see it with elderly people. They'll lose a spouse after 50, 60 years and jump into another relationship. Why? Because they don't want to be alone. So I took his advice. I didn't date. I got to a place to where I enjoy my lonely time. I embraced it. I used it to read the Bible, to pray. I had Eric Lucetta and Melanie Stiles and Derek De La Pena and these close friends of mine that would call every day and pray with me. That support system was key, all these kind of things. But I'm talking about my one situation. But in that, there's so many dynamics to that. But it helped me go through that humility in the right way to where I came out of it stronger than I was before. And I think how we go through something matters so much. We teach this in Maximize Manhood. It's how you leave something determines how you enter it. And so going through the process the right way can end up having you enter. I don't think I'd be a pastor at Lakewood Church after that if I had not gone through that process and if I had not embraced it and gone through it well. And then God opened up a door for me to be in the position I'm in now.
That's good. Yeah, you've talked with me about that before, about that 3-year waiting period, and just walking through, because you're right. I think especially as leaders, I feel like solitude is one of the most empowering things that we can do as leaders. Loneliness is one thing, solitude is another. Jesus even modeled that. He practiced solitude when he would walk away from the crowds and even from his own disciples and go off by himself. That was a refreshing, but it was a learning, or he modeled what it meant to, because that to me, there's a healthiness there. There's a healthy, let me say it like this. Sometimes when we've been through trauma, it's very hard for us to be still and quiet because of the thoughts that go through our mind. And it's like, let me surround myself with as much noise, as much technology as I can, so I don't have to think about these things. And it sounds like you took a period of time where you were like, I'm going to be deliberate and I'm going to think about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't easy. But I agree with you. There is a difference between loneliness, and at first it was loneliness. But as you sit at the feet of Jesus, as you have and pray, as you go through what you need to do, and I even created, I'm futuristic. I like to have, I'm looking down the road. I had put a 5-year plan together to have the house paid off. And I turned these into prayer goals, and within 3 years, I had, I should say God had the house paid off, where it made it where I was financially able to come be a pastor at Lakewood Church. I had my car paid off, and I prayed, God, give me 300,000 miles on this car. I have a 2007 Chevy Tahoe, and I'm still driving it today. I'm at 297,000 miles, so 3 more, and I'll be at 300,000. So now I'm going, God, I met 600,000, but it was also the first time I wasn't upside down in a car. Yeah. And, I was trading in the car, wanting the new car every 3 to 4 years. And I was always upside down financially in the car, not getting the full value of everything else. And now I got a car paid off. It's still driving, and I don't have a loan payment on that. I don't want to give that up. I'm like, keep driving. But it's funny how we can switch things. And that was all part of the process, you know. So I have a financial testimony. I have, you know, the tithing testimony of what God did as I started to tithe. I have, you know, the divorce thing. I have, you know, how that led to me helping people in crisis. I mean, it's crazy how many testimonies can come out of these things, you know. So.
Yeah. And of course, Laura.
Well, Laura's part of the, you know, and Laura went through some heavy stuff too, and it made her who she is. But we both went through some things to become who we are, you know, today together. And so I've gone through it the wrong way and I've gone through it the right way. And I would encourage, especially young people, do it the right way. In fact, Laura and I, this may not be a leadership thing, but Laura and I waited until our wedding night to have sex. And we dated for 7 years, you know, and it was the most intimate experience of my life and was so much different than what I had experienced in the past. And, you know, God doesn't have rules and regulations to keep things from us. He has things in place to protect us so that we can have a full life. And so he created sex as good, but too many times, especially in our youth, we get things in reverse, out of order, and then all of a sudden we're pregnant out of marriage or we get an abortion. You know, when we don't follow what God suggested, it brings death. It brings unwanted consequences. But
Right.
when we do it God's way, he actually wants us to enjoy these things and have a fulfilling life in those things. So don't know if that's leadership, but I think if somebody could tell me something when I was in my youth, if I had paid attention, because so many times, you know, I quit trying to save people from everything, you know, they go through, because so many times we have to go through it ourselves to really learn. And so I feel like even as a leader, sometimes my job is to create crisis. You know, it's to give people an opportunity to go through something. Not that I'm going to, you know, cause, you know, some tragedy in their lives, but it's really to create a crisis, you know, a crisis in management, give them celebrate recovery worship and have them figure that out and have to go through those difficulties. I used to try to save people and do things too much for them. And it's one of the things I learned as a mentor is sometimes I wanted it more than they wanted it. And I did the work for them. And one of the best things I've learned as a mentor, a pastor, whatever, is, you know, give them something to do. If they don't do it, it's on them, you know, but I can't do it for them. And people grow through having to do it for themselves. So I can't want it more than, you know, the person wants it.
That's good. That's good. I'm writing that down. Yeah. What do you think has been your biggest challenge as a leader?
That is a great question. I think, you know, and I always encourage, and you know, I'm passionate about knowing how you're wired. So I've done strengths finders over the years with so many people. And even for myself, being self-aware. And then the Enneagram, you know, I'm a number 9. I'm a peacemaker. And so for me, the challenge has been some of the things that go along with that. I think that what I have to say isn't that important. I think that people don't value what I have to say. So sometimes I stay quiet. I am maybe insecure in some of the decisions I make or how people are seeing things that are decisions I'm making. So I hold myself back. I procrastinate. And so have a book I've been writing for 10 years. It's like there are things that come along with being a number 9. There are struggles that come along with being a number 8. And, so I think
Pride.
my challenge is going to be
Pride.
different than your challenge. Ruby's challenge as a number 2 helper is going to be different because she can't say no to anything. And so I would encourage everybody to really be a learner of yourself, being self-aware, because my struggles are going to be different from your struggles. And it all plays into our leadership. And so I think self-awareness and knowing how we're wired, and even the things we've been through in the past, to where, we have self-esteem issues, or we have triggers, or we have, there's all kinds of things that play out from our childhood. It's like, to me, self-awareness as a leader is one of the key things. Humility fits into that as well, but just being able to know where our blind spots are. That's why we also in internship do the dark side of leadership, because in addition to us having strengths, we have blind spots, or we have tendencies where we may, be prideful, be codependent. I would just say, know yourself well enough. And I've given my wife, Laura, permission to call me on things. Ruby calls me on things, and, I want to be transparent. I want to be authentic. I want to be vulnerable. We've seen that stuff from Brené's book, Daring Greatly, and all that play out. When we can be whole, integrity is wholeness. Integrity, you don't want to get in a plane with a screw loose, integrity means whole. So that plane has integrity to be able to fly. So if we don't have wholeness, if we don't have everything in the right place, if we are still acting out and hurting people, because we always say hurting people hurt people, and it's true, if I'm good, then I don't have to react in anger. I usually look at people, you can make them really mad when they're getting in your face or they're yelling at you, but you're good. And when I react with, what are you going through? How can I pray for you? They'll get madder because they're looking for a reaction out of you. Oh, but when you're good, I don't have to, I don't get mad very often. Ruby's seen me, I think, the only time I got mad, in my life. But Laura can tell you, it takes a lot to get me upset, frazzled, angry. But I would say when you're established on the rock of Jesus Christ, when you're good, when you've worked through the issues, when you've been vulnerable and own your story, man, you can lead out of that without getting all upset. It helps me with resolving conflicts and issues, because I'll sit down with a person. I don't go in anticipating taking their badge away or removing them from ministry. I sit down with them to see how they'll react. It's my responsibility to bring up the issue. How they react to the issue, a lot of times we won't address things with people because we're afraid of their reaction, when really their reaction's on them, not on us. If we're good, I just bring it up with them. And Barbara Curtis taught me this so well, because my first ministry was the prayer partner ministry. And when we had a prayer partner not acting right, we would call them in, not planning, any kind of, next steps around that till we sat down with them. And we'd have people either respond in humility and, oh, I'm so sorry, I won't do that again. Or we had them react in pride, and that would determine how we move forward.
That's good. That's good. And see, I feel like having the wisdom to read people only comes with experience and time. Yeah. Because a lot, to me, even like, and one of the things that I face as an 8 is 8s are relatively self-assured, but that's the problem, is we think that we've read enough, listened enough, that we know and we don't. And that's my biggest challenge. But it speaks to a lot more than just the theories of leadership. It's one of those funny things. The more I study leadership and read books and listen to TED Talks and all the stuff, and watch people and their things, like over the centuries, it's been like the latest leadership theory, the newest wave of thinking, in this way. And it always seems to come back to the same two things. It's not about you, and it's only about you. Mm. One leader said it like that on a TED Talk he was doing. He said 2 rules of leadership that are basic. It's not about you, but it's only about you. Leadership is not about you in the sense that it's for others. Your leadership exists so that you would help other people, you would serve. And the other one he said was, but it's not about theory. You reproduce who you are. It's about you as a person, not about all the theories and the principles and everything that you can regurgitate in some lecture. He said, real leadership is you develop who you are into somebody else, not what you do.
That's so good. And we do attract people like us, around us and things like that. And so you do reproduce who you are. I've found that as I select ministry leaders, as I select volunteers, those around me, things like that, I really have narrowed it down to where I look for 2 things. I look for faithfulness, and a lot of times I'll let things play out for a while and really see a person's character, that they're responsible, that they do what they say they're going to do. I let that play out, and that's faithfulness. A lot of times I've taken my ministry leaders or potential leaders on a mission trip, because at Lakewood, or sometimes in our workplace, it's easy to be a good leader when everything's going well. Yeah. And we kind of get in routines to where, I can usher and I do the same thing every week and, on and on. But when I take somebody on a mission trip, I get to see, are they adaptable? How do they do it? Because nothing ever goes perfect on a mission trip. You have to be flexible, adaptable, all that kind of thing. So I love giving people opportunity to see how they deal with that. And so faithfulness is one. The other one is teachability, because if you're not teachable, that's usually a sign of pride. Yeah. And it's also a protection mechanism, because maybe you're not teachable or open to feedback because your self-esteem is wrapped up in your opinions, in your decisions and things like that. So if you're not teachable and willing to change or take feedback, then you're not going to be a great leader. You could be a leader, but you may, as a number 8, run over people and leave a wake of bodies, in that. But if you're teachable, open to feedback, and you're willing to change, and I can work with you and help you mold you into the leader God created you to be, then that's the person I want. So I really look at those 2 things, faithfulness and are they teachable?
That's so good. Pastor Serena brought this when she came from Cali last year, and we were walking through the vision of Next Gen, and she said that was the top 3 things that we decided as a pastoral team to say, these are the 3 characteristics we're going to look at first for leadership. And we called it FAT: faithful, available, teachable. And so when we made our notes, I was like, she goes, so we're gonna see about people being faithful, being available, and being teachable. And she said, none of that takes skill. None of that takes gifting. Everybody can be faithful. Anybody can be available, and anybody can be teachable. And I was like, that's so good. So you saying that is like dead on with some of the first notes that I have for leadership stuff. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe you and Serena took a class I'm not aware of. How could I get in this?
I think it just goes back again to experience, and just seeing what works and what doesn't work.
Well, I think that to me is huge, because I think I look at Paul told Timothy, he's, in 2 Timothy, he said, find faithful men and women who God will make able. And sometimes in the church, especially, we go, we find somebody who's really gifted and we're like, I hope to God you're faithful. It's like we want to put them in positions of power or leadership or whatever because they're gifted and they haven't shown any faithfulness. And it's like the last 6 or 8 years of leadership for me, I've tried to intentionally do the opposite. I'm like, nah, let's empower the people who have been faithful. God will make them able.
I guess my only time I have regrets as a leader is when I shortcut the process, when I bring somebody in too quickly or put them in leadership too quickly without seeing their faithfulness, without giving it time to kind of see their character. Anytime I shortchange the process, that's usually when I have an issue.
Keith Craft, who my parents were, I've known him my whole life. He's a kind of a de facto uncle of mine. My parents worked for him, and my dad was in the 80s, brought him in with Strike Force and all of his, bodybuilding stuff. As a kid, I was homeschooled, so we would go do assemblies with them. They would come in town and we would go to junior highs and high schools and they would do all the feats of strength or whatever. So I loved it. Anyways, his leadership stuff. I remember when he first started Elevate Life Church and they were doing a men's meeting one Saturday morning and there was about, 150 men there maybe. And they had these round tables for breakfast and they were doing a men's meeting that Saturday morning, men's brigade kind of thing. And so they come in and he meets this guy. This guy comes in and he goes, it's my first time here. And I just want to let you know, Pastor, I'm gifted. I'm a gifted teacher. This is the first couple times I've come in to Elevate Life. I think it's a great church and I want to be a part, but I'm just letting you know, this is my gift. And Keith goes, awesome. See that round table over there? Can you fold it up and roll it into that closet? All the men were doing it afterwards, even Keith. They were rolling the tables into the closet and tearing down together. And he goes, no, listen, I'm telling you, this is I have a specific gift. And Keith's like, great, grab that table and roll it into that closet. The guy's like, no, I don't think you understand. I'm a teacher. That's my gift. That's how I serve. And Keith goes, great, teach yourself how to roll that table into that closet. Never saw the guy again. And it was like, I think that's what you just said. You said your regrets when I shortcut the process and I put people into place too quickly. I think that's one of my biggest ones in leadership too, is to say, I tried to shortchange or shortcut the process. And I feel like if you ask somebody to serve in an area that they don't think is their spot, they're like, no, that's beneath me. It's like, what are they telling you right off the bat about leadership? And I thought I was going to ask the question about regrets. And that's, I don't know. It's like you saying that is like a light bulb going off in my head going, that's so true. Because it not only shortcuts the process for whatever team we have,
mm-hmm.
but it also for that individual. It doesn't help them.
Mm-hmm. And I've experienced, especially, everybody likes to, kind of talk about the process I went through with Nate Morris and not giving up on him and all that. But one of the things that I learned through that is people give up on people too quickly. And I would say another thing I'd really, want to express to the church and to the youth and everyone else is, and I think it also comes from a position of just, being a good steward of people. We're doing this unto God. I even gave my kids to God, and Ruby and I talked about that the other day, that God, they're yours, you deal with them. I'm just going to be a good steward and help them be independent and get on their own. But what I discovered, with Nate and many others is I was the only one that stuck with him through the entire process. There were others along the way, but they gave up on him. And I was just amazed and in some ways disappointed by some of the examples of that I saw within the church. God never gives up on us. And maybe I have a little more tenacity around that, and God's gifted me, with a grace for that. But I think as Christians, and yeah, there's some people that are a little harder to deal with than others and that kind of thing. But, I saw, it goes back to faithfulness and teachability. I saw that Nate was teachable and that he was trying. He had a long way to go and overcame a lot, but to see where he is now and what we walked through together to get to that place. But I just think that, and I've seen it numerous times, we love the testimonies, everything else, but I feel like we don't get to know people. One of the things that I've loved about having Lexi come into the house is getting to know her better. People assume she's not smart because of her condition and being in a wheelchair and those kind of things. And her number one thing she wishes is that people would hug her, listen to her, get to know her. And very few people do that. I got to know her in a way that, and know how smart she is. She was an honor student at Lamar High School. She's now been accepted into college, but I made a few years ago just I think it's a leadership thing. I was determined to get to know people at a deeper level, not just go through the church and say, I'm highly favored, all these kind of things and how you do them, but not really care about going deeper than that. It really hit me. There was a funeral and I was at the funeral and it was a volunteer with somebody I knew pretty well. And they shared all these things I didn't know about the guy. And I said, I'm not going to let that happen again. I felt bad that I didn't know his story better or all the things that he had done. So I think as leaders, I think getting to know the people under us at a deeper level is like really important, really critical, and makes a difference as a leader. Like how Ruby ticks. I know where she thrives, where she struggles, when I need to check on her. I want to know how her family is doing. I love being part of her family. We should take an intentional interest in the people that are serving with us. And I don't think we always do that. So I can ramble on and on about, people and caring for people and that kind of thing. But I know that God doesn't give up on people. And we need to take a deeper interest in knowing people and knowing them, more thoroughly. But I didn't think I could talk a whole hour, but we seem to, we did a pretty good job, Pastor Jeremy.
We can go ahead and stop it now, but I tell you what, we will come back and we'll have more conversations, because I think, and yeah, I think that there's so much, even just in the conversations that we've had, there's so much impartation in leadership. And I think the thing that fascinates me about you is that you've done it both in the church and in the marketplace, in the corporate world. That's fascinating to me. And because I wanted to get my, my first vision in college when I first started was my MBA. And that was going to be my path until God knocked me off the horse and blinded me and said, no, you have a calling to full-time ministry. And I was like, I've been in full-time ministry my whole life and my family's broke. I don't want to do that anymore.
One quick thing around that. One of my favorite books of all time is called Good to Great. And
Collins, right?
Yeah.
Collins.
And in that book, he talks about, the 5 levels of leadership. And really, when you look at the examples of level 5 leaders, they weren't all Christians. Some of them were, but they all had been through a traumatic experience or something that brought them to that humility, something that brought them to that next level. And the big difference to me when I was, working with companies outside of the church and then working with people in the church is we have more opportunity to get to that level 5 leader because we have Jesus, we have the Holy Spirit, we have transformation. Pastor Joel's a level 5 leader. There's a level of humility, of honoring others, of selflessness, all these things that go along with being a level 5 leader. So the big difference to me, because I would work with executives that were CEOs and vice presidents and running companies and that kind of thing, but they weren't humble. Not all of them were teachable. They were very secure in themselves or insecure, and that would play out in the way their behaviors were going. But the big difference to me is we are very blessed within the church to have the Holy Spirit, to not have to go through this alone, to be able to go to another level and be teachable and become everything God created us to be. And that's a huge difference between being a leader in the church and even in the world, in the workplace. But when you're a Christian leader, man, you could be the best leader on earth. It took too long for corporate to find out that, Jesus had it right all along, best leader of all time, but he leads differently than just the way a lot of the world leaders lead. So.
That's good. That's good. Making notes here. Dude, I'm going to the margins now. I'm running out of space. Yeah, I think you had a lot more than an hour in you, dude. I think you got a series. I don't know why you don't have a podcast yet. I'm just throwing it out there. You have the personhood and the voice for it.
Oh my goodness. Well, Harrison Wilder has been trying to get me to do a YouTube channel. I'm like, if you'll help me, but it goes back to that number 9. I gotta, put it on the schedule, do all that. And so, but anyway, I appreciate the time. It's always fun to kind of talk through, especially with you. One of my dreams for years, I used to tell Eric this, Eric, 10 years ago was doing his Bible study out of my house. And it's neat seeing you guys on Monday night Bible studies. But one of the things I'd talked to him about is, man, let's do like Copeland on TV and let's do a coffee talk. And, even though it ended up not being me, it's you that's doing that with him. I love that we finally went there. We got to that place because this is kind of a neat dynamic where you just kind of, interview, you talk through things, you discuss things. I think it's very engaging. And I just appreciate your friendship, your leadership, getting to do ministry with you. And, it's just awesome. So I think I just enjoy the time with you. And anytime we can do this, I'm open to it. But I just appreciate you, my friend. And you too, Ruby.
You as well, John. And the first time I ever heard you speak, it was in Trailblazers, and you were doing a breakout for, I think it was for Inside Lakewood. Was it Inside Lake? No. What was it? You were doing a breakout.
Was it like the Leadership Lab or something like that?
Yeah, it was a leadership thing, but it wasn't just for our volunteers. It was for other people coming in. Anyways,
okay.
I just remember you had a room full of about 40 or 50 people just sitting there, and you got up and you started telling your story, and then you shared things that you'd gone through and just how God had really brought you through. And I remembered asking you about your sort of non-church ministry experience in life, and you shared with me, and then you got up and spoke for about 30 minutes, and I went, oh, okay, I see it. Like, it was like, because somebody just has a presence, they just have a confidence when they've been through things, or they've done this a lot, like especially public speaking, and to get up. And so I think you're a lot better in front of big groups than you expect. But that was the first time I ever really heard you. And I was like, okay, this guy's sharp. And, you can just see it on somebody when they have that, And so anyways, thank you for the time. I know we went 15, 20 minutes over, but we will definitely do this again. I want to hear some more from you. This was only an hour, but I want more than anything else, I want to continue to learn. And I think for me and for Tara, it's always going to be like that, just because early on in my career, because the way I'm wired, I thought I knew a lot. And the more I've done in leadership or in ministry, the more I realized I don't know anything. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I think
that's why I kind of look at learning as a lifestyle. And, I learn all the time from the interns. I learn from Ruby. I learn from you. It's like one of the things I love about, so many times we think our idea is the best. But when I give a project to somebody and just kind of share the vision of here's where we want to go, they may do it totally different than me. But I am blown away with some of our youth. They come up with such better ideas. And it takes secure leader to be okay with younger people or other people coming up with ideas that maybe you wouldn't have thought of. But that excites me. I mean, I love it. And there are so many ideas that bubble up that I don't come up with, but I love to implement that others come up with. So I just love opening it up to where I'm teachable. I think it also helps me continue to be relevant as a leader. And the youth like me, even though I'm older. And, I get them involved and they're doing ministry. And Ruby can tell you, I let them lead out even at a young age and get that experience. And so I love that, there's so many good ideas out there and most of them don't come from me. But if we'll do projects, do ministry, do things, and we guide them, but a lot of times I've found that, they'll come up with better ideas than me, so.
That's good. Last thing, I'll let you go. I feel like if I can say this for you personally as a leader, I think you just said a mouthful when you said that, especially the young generation, they feed off of you. And I think they feed off of you because you do one thing really well. You do a lot of things really well. Let me say it like that. But I think your number one thing that I've learned from you is something in leadership that a lot of leaders don't practice well. If they're smart, they do. And I think that you do one thing really well. And I think that's listen. More than anything else I've learned about you in the last 10 years is you are a habitual listener. And I think you learn a lot. I think humans learn a lot when they listen. The problem is we don't listen for insecurity reasons, for time reasons, for we don't think this person's perspective is going to be valuable, and I think you do that as well as anybody I've seen. And I think that to me is why I think you've done so well in leadership in every space. Is not because of what you say, but it's the times that you shut up and listen. And
I appreciate that. That's a teachable skill. So if somebody's not good at it, they can become that way. As a number 9, before I was saved, and I had a boss one time that was really introverted, and he would call me And I would try to fill the silence. I didn't like the silence. It made me uncomfortable. And I would end up spilling my guts, everything I knew and everything like that. But the cool thing about through that process is I learned to be okay with silence. And I think that's the struggle we have sometimes is, we'll sit there in a conversation, we try to fill the void. It's uncomfortable, that 7 second of silence, whatever it may be. But when we could just sit there, I'll do that with the interns a lot. I'll be like, I'm good with silence. I'll sit here until somebody answers the question, And I think too many times we're not okay with our own silence and we're uncomfortable. And, that's another sign or a good way as a secure leader to get to a place to where you don't have to do all the talking. You're curious about others and hear their story. And you just give people time to talk and you listen and be proactive listening and that kind of thing. But I haven't always been that way. And I would tell you, there are certain skills that are teachable. Communication is teachable, listening is teachable. So even if someone's not currently great at these things, there are things that are hard to teach. Being positive, attitude, a lot of times we're wired with those things or we have to be transformed to those things. But things like listening is very teachable. You just have to get to a place of being okay with silence and practice silence. Sometimes I'll just sit there and say, we'll sit here until you guys start to talk, and it's a good little, I guess, way to be, because people will share eventually, but sometimes we don't give them enough time to think about it or respond. So we could go on and on, good. But yeah, just a few thoughts.
That's good. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking time and
thank you too. It's an honor.